For decades, Tony Iommi and Ozzy Osbourne shared more than just a stage. They shared a brotherhood forged in the smoke-stained streets of Birmingham, born out of hardship, music, and an unspoken understanding. Now, at 77, with Ozzy gone and an era of music history closed forever, Iommi has finally broken his silence. And what he's shared has left fans around the world stunned, emotional, and reflective. This isn't just a tribute from a former bandmate. It's the heartfelt mourning of a lifelong friend who witnessed Ozzy's chaotic brilliance and quiet vulnerability up close. For Iommi, saying goodbye is personal, and his words paint a powerful portrait of loss, love, and lasting legacy. The sudden silence, Ozzy Osbourne's final goodbye. The news hit like a thunderclap. On July 22, 2025, the world awoke to the shocking announcement that Ozzy Osbourne, the Prince of Darkness and legendary frontman of Black Sabbath, had passed away at the age of 76. For many, it was difficult to grasp. The man whose voice had echoed through stadiums and headphones for over 5 decades was gone. The global music community, fans, and media outlets struggled to process the loss of a figure who seemed larger than life, a cultural icon whose wild energy, dark charm, and unmistakable voice helped define the very genre of heavy metal. Just weeks before his death, Ozzy had stood under the glowing lights of Villa Park Stadium in Birmingham, delivering what would unknowingly become his final performance. Despite battling Parkinson's disease and enduring multiple spinal surgeries, he commanded the stage with haunting presence, seated on a custom leather throne designed just for him. To the audience, he was electric, a rock legend giving his all one last time. No one could have imagined this would be his farewell. Unlike many whose final moments are drawn out in gradual decline, Ozzy's passing was quiet and peaceful. Reports indicated that his health had stabilized after that final concert, and whispers circulated that he was even planning to return to the studio for one last track. But just a day after sharing a private dinner with his bandmates, Ozzy died peacefully in his sleep at his home in Buckinghamshire, with his wife Sharon and their children by his side. The shock was profound. The vibrant performer had slipped away silently, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. Back to the beginning. The final concert in Birmingham. On July 5, 2025, a historic moment unfolded in Aston, Birmingham, the city that had shaped Ozzy Osbourne and his bandmates. The original members of Black Sabbath reunited for what would become their final performance together in an event aptly named Back to the Beginning. This wasn't just another concert. It was a poignant tribute to the city that birthed their sound, and a final curtain call for one of the most influential bands in music history. The spectacle was minimalistic yet deeply symbolic. Ozzy made a dramatic entrance, seated on a custom-winged leather throne, centered on a stage designed to echo the dark and haunting aesthetic that defined Black Sabbath's music. Though visibly frail, his spirit was undiminished. With every note and lyric, he poured raw emotion, nostalgia, and gratitude into a performance that left the crowd breathless. More than 45,000 fans filled the open-air stadium, their cheers and applause swelling with every song. Beyond the physical audience, a staggering 5.8 million viewers tuned in worldwide via live stream, making it one of the most watched music events of the decade. Fans traveled from across continents, many knowing this could be their last chance to see the original kings of heavy metal live. A night of tribute and generosity. Back to the Beginning was not only a farewell, but a force for good. The event raised an estimated €140 million through ticket sales, merchandise, and global streaming donations. These funds were dedicated to Cure Parkinson's, a charity close to Ozzy's heart, as well as Birmingham Children's Hospital, a nod to the band's working-class roots and enduring commitment to their hometown community. As the final chords of Paranoid echoed through the stadium, the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the crowd. Ozzy raised a trembling hand, his eyes shimmering with tears, acknowledging decades of support from fans and friends alike. Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward stood beside him, visibly moved. There were no pyrotechnics or flashy effects, only the raw power of music, lifelong brotherhood, and an audience aware they were witnessing a historic moment. The concert's title, Back to the Beginning, took on profound meaning that night. It was more than a farewell. It was a full-circle moment that honored the past while bidding goodbye to an era that had defined a generation. A world mourns. Tributes. Pour in following Ozzy's death, tributes flooded in from across the globe. Musicians such as Metallica's James Hetfield, Elton John, Slash, and even Coldplay's members shared memories and heartfelt condolences. They celebrated Ozzy not only as a pioneering artist, but as a man whose influence transcended genres and generations. Fans gathered in cities worldwide, lighting candles outside Black Sabbath's former studio and assembling at Ozzy's childhood home in Aston, Birmingham. These impromptu memorials celebrated the working-class boy who rose to become a global icon, a symbol of rebellion, resilience, and raw talent. Amidst the outpouring of grief and admiration, one voice fans awaited most was that of Tony Iommi, Ozzy's longtime friend, bandmate, and brother-in-arms. Tony Iommi breaks his silence. On July 23, 2025, a day after the world learned of Ozzy's passing, Tony Iommi finally spoke publicly about the loss. In a heartfelt interview with ITV News, he described the news as surreal, explaining that the weight of it didn't fully hit until the morning after. "I woke up and it hit me like a ton of bricks," Iommi said, his voice heavy with emotion. The pain, he explained, wasn't just about losing a bandmate or musical collaborator. It was about losing a lifelong companion who had been a constant through decades of shared highs and lows. Iommi revealed that in the weeks leading up to Ozzy's death, his friend expressed a deep wish to perform one last time in Birmingham. It wasn't about grandeur or spectacle. It was a simple, heartfelt goodbye to the fans who had stood by him for over 50 years. "He wanted to go out doing what he loved, where it all started," Tony shared, his voice breaking. Although Ozzy's health ultimately prevented that final show, the very idea of it left an indelible mark on those closest to him. Tony recounted how Ozzy had quietly said goodbye not just to the band, but also to the fans in those final days, a poignant farewell known only to those nearest to him. A brotherhood forged in Birmingham streets. To truly understand the depth of Tony and Ozzy's connection, one must return to where it all began, the gritty streets of Birmingham in the early 1960s. Before fame, before sold-out arenas, Tony Iommi and John Michael Osbourne, known to the world as Ozzy, were just two working-class boys navigating a tough industrial city. Birmingham at the time was defined by its factories, its smoke-filled air, and the sound of machinery. For many young boys, the expected path was straight to the factory floor. The notion of music stardom was barely imaginable amid the daily grind of working-class life. Ozzy, the fourth of 6 children, grew up in a crowded home in the district of Aston. He was known as the class clown, with a mischievous grin and a knack for making people laugh. A boy full of energy but struggling academically, particularly with reading and writing. Yet beneath the mischief was a restless spirit. He often spoke about the moment his life changed, hearing the Beatles' "She Loves You" as a teenager. The song ignited something inside him, a glimpse of possibility and direction that would eventually lead him away from factory work and into the history books as a rock legend. Two boys from Birmingham, the early days of Tony Iommi and Ozzy Osbourne. In the smoky industrial heart of Aston, Birmingham, two boys were growing up amid the grit and grime of post-war England. Tony Iommi and John Michael Osbourne, better known to the world as Ozzy, lived just a few streets apart, yet their personalities and paths were strikingly different in their youth. Tony was the quieter, more serious type. He was introspective and focused, preferring to observe rather than command attention. From an early age, music fascinated him, but he had no inkling that it would one day shape his destiny. School for Tony was a place of routine and discipline. He kept mostly to himself, absorbing his surroundings with thoughtful eyes. Ozzy, on the other hand, was the class clown, the life of any room he entered. With a mischievous grin and quick wit, he made his presence known through jokes and antics. School was often a challenge for Ozzy, especially academics, but his larger-than-life personality made him unforgettable. Despite their contrasting natures, these two boys shared something rare, an unspoken understanding born from the tough realities of their environment. School was strict, teachers were tough, and the looming shadow of a future in factory work hung over every young man in Aston. This shared backdrop would soon forge a bond neither fully understood at the time. A shared dream beyond factory life. Growing up in working-class Birmingham during the 1950s and 60s meant accepting a harsh reality. Smoke poured from factory chimneys, the air thick with metal and machinery. For most kids, life meant working long hours in industrial plants, living paycheck to paycheck. But both Tony and Ozzy yearned for something more. It wasn't friendship at first, just a casual familiarity. Their paths crossed on streets and schoolyards, but it was the shared desire to escape the factory floor and find a different future that eventually brought them closer. Tony, reserved but passionate about music, found in Ozzy a kindred spirit with an uncontainable energy and a hunger for something bigger. Years later, Tony would reflect on those days as formative, a time when Ozzy's energy and charisma stood out, like a beacon in a city that rarely produced rock stars. Two boys from Aston were unknowingly nurturing the spark that would ignite a musical revolution. Their friendship, rooted in the classrooms and playgrounds of Birchfield Road School, was the beginning of a story far beyond their smoke-stained skies and humble beginnings. The birth of Black Sabbath, a musical revolution. Fast forward to the early 1970s. Birmingham, still bearing the scars of industrial labor, was the unlikely birthplace of a sound that would change music forever. Black Sabbath emerged from this working-class backdrop, led by the deep, riff-driven guitar work of Tony Iommi and the haunting vocals of Ozzy Osbourne. Their music was unlike anything the world had heard, darker, heavier, and rawer than traditional rock. Critics struggled to categorize it, but fans instantly connected with its intensity and honesty. What was unfolding wasn't just the rise of a new band, it was the birth of heavy metal. Their self-titled debut album, Black Sabbath, 1970, opened with the eerie tolling of church bells and crashing thunder, immediately setting an ominous tone. The album's doom-laden atmosphere reflected the anxieties of working-class life. War, paranoia, and the supernatural all echoed in their lyrics. It was music born from the fear and unrest of the era, resonating deeply with a generation caught between political upheaval and social change. Months later came Paranoid, the breakthrough album that catapulted the band to international fame. With iconic tracks like Iron Man, War Pigs, and the title song Paranoid, the album rocketed up the charts in both the UK and the US. Ozzy's piercing, emotional delivery paired perfectly with Tony's distorted, heavy guitar riffs, a sound that was powerful, innovative, and magnetic. Rising fame and unprecedented success. The success of Black Sabbath's early albums wasn't a fluke. It was the result of raw talent, fearless experimentation, and a deep connection to the gritty realities of working-class life. As the 1970s progressed, the band continued to break new ground, releasing a series of landmark albums that would forever alter the landscape of rock music. Master of Reality brought sludgy, down-tuned riffs that influenced generations of musicians, while Volume 4, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage showcased Tony Iommi's increasingly inventive guitar work, often layering multiple tracks to create dense, immersive soundscapes. The lyrical content, often penned by bassist Geezer Butler, dove into themes of addiction, isolation, paranoia, and the spiritual cost of fame, subjects rarely touched in mainstream rock at the time. And yet, fans connected. Black Sabbath's music didn't just entertain, it echoed their pain, fears, and questions about the world. With Ozzy Osbourne's haunting, emotionally charged vocals leading the way, the band toured relentlessly, selling out arenas across Europe and North America. By the end of the decade, they had sold over 75 million albums worldwide. Once factory boys from Birmingham, they had become global icons, the godfathers of heavy metal, strains and breakdowns, trials of fame and friendship. However, the journey was far from smooth. By the late 1970s, personal and professional pressures began to erode the band's unity. Years of grueling tours, relentless industry demands, and the dark spiral of substance abuse took a heavy toll, especially on Ozzy Osbourne. His increasing dependence on alcohol and drugs made band dynamics fragile. Tensions grew, and after multiple attempts to hold the group together, the members, led by Tony Iommi, made the painful decision to part ways with Ozzy in 1979. This marked the end of an era, a fracture that shook both the band and Ozzy's life. Ozzy later described being fired from Black Sabbath as a devastating low point, but also the start of his solo career, a new chapter filled with both triumph and turbulence. Meanwhile, Tony took it upon himself to keep the Black Sabbath name alive. Over the next 2 decades, he worked with various lineups and vocalists, including Ronnie James Dio, Ian Gillan, and Tony Martin. Though each brought unique energy, the original chemistry was irreplaceable, and fans often longed for a classic reunion. The enduring bond. From rift to reunion. Despite the split and many difficult years, the bond between Tony Iommi and Ozzy Osbourne never fully dissolved. Time softened wounds and maturity brought perspective. Their shared past, from schoolyard friendship to groundbreaking music, was a powerful force neither could ignore. In 2013, after decades of separation, the original trio of Tony Iommi, Ozzy Osbourne, and Geezer Butler reunited to release 13, a studio album that returned to the raw, primal energy of their early days. It debuted at #1 in multiple countries and was widely praised as a triumphant comeback. Though drummer Bill Ward declined to join the tour over contractual disagreements, the reunion was still seen as a celebration of legacy and brotherhood. Fans worldwide rejoiced at the sight of Tony and Ozzy sharing the stage once again. A brotherhood beyond music. Tony Iommi reflects Ozzy Osbourne's death in July 2025, marked the close of a monumental chapter in rock history. For Tony Iommi, the loss was deeply personal, not just the passing of a bandmate, but the loss of a brother and lifelong friend. In the emotional days after Ozzy's death, Tony's words resonated with millions. There'll never be another Ozzy. That simple statement carried the weight of 50 years of shared experiences, on stage, backstage, in studios, and on the road. Tony believed Ozzy knew his final performance would be his last bow. He gave everything he had, Tony said quietly, and then quietly slipped away. It was a gesture reflecting Ozzy's profound love for music and his desire to end his journey on his own terms, alongside those who had been his constant through it all. The legacy lives on, more than music. When reflecting on Ozzy's impact, Tony didn't speak of awards or record sales. Instead, he recalled moments of laughter, trials survived, and an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of friendship and music. There was only one Ozzy, Tony said softly, and that's it. Ozzy's legacy extends far beyond his voice, raw, emotional, and instantly recognizable, to the chaotic magic he brought to every room. From teenagers discovering Paranoid for the first time to global icons like Metallica and Elton John who have praised his influence, Ozzy's shadow looms large over rock and metal. For Tony, that legacy is personal. It lives in the shared memories of a friendship that began in the factories and streets of Birmingham and will roar on through the speakers of every fan who dares to turn the volume up loud. Want daily knowledge drops? Subscribe now. Your brain will thank you later.